there won't be any interruptions. Now we're talking tonight about the election laws position update that is being recommended for adoption at convention this year. The League of Women Voters has an election laws position, but it is in need of updating. And there has been proposed some revision to the existing text and addition of new items. Position for action, here it is printed out. You can find it on the League's website, and it contains the League's positions on a host of issues. Some issues are being brought up as new ones. For example, the housing study that was the subject of a caucus last night. But there is an election laws position, and there has been for some time. The study committee prepared a document with the new recommended material incorporated into the existing election laws position so that you can see how all of the recommendations from the extensive two-part report that we prepared can be read into the more abbreviated, much more concise language of the position itself. And I will hold this up. This is also on the League's convention website.
I'm just going to put it in here.
Excuse me. We call it the position narrative, and you will find it posted on the League's convention website for you to read between now and the time of the vote. And you can even read it after that if you like. But you should read that if you want to understand exactly what the position would look like in terms of adoption. I'm going to share my slides. 1 second. Here we go. So that was our introductory slide. And let's go back to the 2016 general election. During and after the election, we all learned of attempts to hack into our country's election systems and efforts at foreign interference in the election. Even in Virginia, there were knocks at the door of our election management system, and fortunately, none of those came to pass in terms of actual hacking. I don't know what happened. There we go. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. Several local leagues at that time saw points in the election laws position in need of updating. And I don't know why this keeps switching.
I think if you go down to where it says share screen, there's a little green arrow. And
yeah, but that's what I'm sharing the wrong.
Multiple participants can share simultaneously. Have you clicked on that?
Do you see it now?
Yes.
No.
No.
No?
No.
No.
Oh dear.
Would you like me to share your slides?
Yes, here it is, share. There, now you can see it.
Now you're in control.
Oh, now you got
All right, thank you. Forgive me for my technical lack of skill here. Several local leagues saw that there were points in the current election laws position in need of updating or addition, and they were Richmond metro area, Fairfax area, Falls Church, and Arlington leagues. At convention in 2019, there was a resolution presented. And these items were consolidated into a resolution. Rather than a wholesale review of the entire election laws position, the resolution focuses on ensuring election security, creating and maintaining high standards for election management, ensuring trustworthiness and improvements in voter access. Also, in the existing election laws position, cybersecurity is not addressed. The electronic voting language needed revision. There was no statement regarding photo ID. There's no discussion of ranked choice voting or any other alternative electoral system, and voter suppression is not fully addressed either. When that resolution passed, a steering committee formed. And the steering committee is, in addition to myself, Jane Newell of Richmond, Sidney Johnson of Fairfax, and Allison Brown from Falls Church was a member of the steering committee for part 1. We represent each of the 4 leagues that brought the items into the resolution. And Allison became co-president of the Falls Church League. And so she was unable to participate for part 2, but she was very helpful and working closely with us in part 1. We also had a terrific study committee who did a lot of much of the drafting and research that created the reports on which the proposed position is drawn. I want to mention them. Barbara Amster from Prince William worked on voter suppression. Pam Berg from Arlington, also voter suppression. She took the lead in that. Diane Blay from the Fairfax area worked on ranked choice voting. Janet Boyd from Arlington worked on early voting. Judy Collins from Arlington worked on physical security and voter suppression. Evelyn Glazer from Richmond worked on voter suppression. Courtney Hess from Fairfax also worked on voter suppression. Becky Lawson from the Richmond area worked on certification standards, and all of the cybersecurity information in there is Becky's work. Susan Molnix and Linda Rice from Williamsburg were participated in the early voting section. Anna Weber from Arlington on physical security, and Grace White from Prince William worked in ranked choice voting. So why did we?
Hi there. Hi. How are you doing?
Hey, how are you doing?
Oh,
Could you
just
please,
fine.
mute
I'm just
yourself?
fine. I've had a very quiet day.
Oh, you have?
Yeah.
Well, I'm feeling for Caucus.
Okay. Those were the 6 topics that formed the scope of the resolution, and there could have been plenty of others. A key point to understand, however, is that while the report is very technical, given the nature of the topics, the position text must be sufficiently general to withstand technical change and change in laws. As the world evolves, the position needs to be able to keep up with that. And it's really important that the position not obsolete. So why are there 2 parts to the election laws position report? Well, the study committee was assigned a single study. We divided it into 2 parts because we believed it was really critical to develop a position on the major issue of election security in the run-up to the 2020 general election. In addition to the election security sections, we added early voting, sometimes called no excuse absentee voting, and the statement opposing a photo ID requirement. We added those because legislation was wending its way through the General Assembly, and we thought it was really important that the League have a position as soon as possible. In fact, both laws passed while the report was being researched and written, but it's important for the League to keep that position, its position, because as we know, laws can change. The second part of the study covers 2 topics that could each be a study on its own, and that's ranked choice voting and voter suppression. Now, this is the timeline from May 2019 up to really this coming Sunday, showing all of the steps that were taken to research the study, write the study, first part 1, distribute that to the local leagues and the board for review, and then moving along to part 2 and creation of the position narrative and all of the steps that took place in there. And we're going to discuss those a bit right now in terms of the consensus building process. consensus among the leagues is key. We produced a feedback form, and we sent the feedback form and discussion questions along with an executive summary to all the local leagues. Here it is. That's the feedback form. Discussion questions also. We sent those for the local leagues to help focus their consideration of the reports, parts 1 and 2. The steering committee presented the draft of part 1 of the report at council in June of 2020. And then the local leagues had between June and October to give their feedback. And some local leagues held special meetings. They invited steering committee members to come and make presentations and to answer questions. And then they provided extensive comments in their feedback forms. Basically, the same process took place for part 2 on a somewhat expedited basis. And then the steering committee, with help from committee members, study committee members, revised both parts after a detailed examination of all the feedback. We accepted a great preponderance of the comments that we received. And that was the process leading to the point where we are today. And now we're going to talk about some of the substance of the proposed position text and where it comes from in the recommendations. So turning to those recommendations, you will see on this slide where it says the position in brief should include a concise statement, and then it'll say page 1. Page 1 is page 1 of the position narrative that we already called your attention to. And then down at the bottom, also in light green, it directs you to the proper page of the report where you can find the supporting recommendation. And in between those two light green sections is the bold-faced italics that is the proposed text itself, which you'll find on page 1 of the position narrative. Now we're going into one small addition that's being made in the position in brief. Now, I should explain also that the way a league position is written is that at the beginning, there is a position in brief, then there's a league history, and then there is the position in full. So there is a brief reference in the position in brief to absentee voting, and we added the words without having to provide a reason, which is drawn directly from our research and our report on no excuse absentee voting, early voting, and the italicized language clarifies and emphasizes the existing language. And the point here in this slide is to show a change that we made in the section on electronic voting, which is better known and more accurately known as internet voting. And we want to make the point that while the league fully supports and endorses and encourages convenient voting for military and overseas voters so that they are able to cast their ballots in a timely manner and get them back to their local elections offices to be counted. And it must be convenient. Nevertheless, we want to avoid any insecure methods of transmitting the ballots, such as through the internet. And please note again, the page citation here is to the position narrative, and then there is a reference to part C where we discussed internet voting. On this slide, we were talking here about the new parts that we've added to be and are being proposed for approval on Sunday, along with the rest of the position narrative. Cybersecurity, physical security, ranked choice voting, photo ID, and voter suppression. Those are all new sections. And you will find the analysis in all parts of the report, all the sections listed at the bottom of the slide. Now we get to the league's history, as I mentioned. And the league's history is quite extensive. It's the way the league developed the entire election laws position over time. And at the end, we added a new paragraph that we hope will become part of the history on Sunday as the way this process worked and the approval. So we've added some introductory text to the position in full. And that is what this italicized language is. It's a new introduction for the full position. And it basically consolidates all the recommendations in just really a few brief words. Then we took the league position in full and we did a little bit of rearranging in order to make it fully accommodate our new recommendations. The current position is divided into registration, the role of the Commonwealth, and the role of the localities. And we decided to approach this a little differently. And first we specified that we're talking about voter registration when we say registration. So we've added the italicized word voting. Then we looked at election management. So we're looking at this in a more sort of executive way. Rather than who does it, it's what's being done. So in election management, we then look to the role of the Commonwealth, which is of course mainly the Department of Elections, and then to the role of the localities, which is where local electoral boards, local registrars and their offices come into play. Election cybersecurity, a new section, is really the responsibility of both the state and the localities. Electoral systems is essentially the section on ranked choice voting, and voter access deals with voter suppression. Okay, the first of those was voter registration. And these are the proposed updates that we have. We wanted to add state laws because after all, the state laws have changed in order to expand the availability of voter registration. And we have a couple of new bullet points that address some of the new sections we have in terms of election management and the other new areas that we have addressed for the first time in our reports and in the position narrative. And the support for elections databases, you will find that in part B2 of the report on page 12. Then we get to election management and we look at the role of the Commonwealth. This is for the Department of Elections primarily. It's chiefly responsible for up-to-date and accurate list management. It is responsible for risk limiting audits when they cross jurisdictional lines. A prime example is the statewide risk limiting audit conducted in February and March of this year. Then it has the systems, it must develop systems to support ranked choice voting if it is developed at the local level or it moves on to the state level. The Department of Elections must be ready to debunk disinformation and misinformation. And then we draw upon the three parts of the report to support these three items. Then we look at the role of the localities. In general, you will see that the updates are on pages 3 and 4 of the position narrative. We're looking at early voting. We're looking at voting for military and overseas voters and those with disabilities without transmitting voted ballots over the internet, because that is an insecure method. We have got some new methods for voters with disabilities also. And we have to maintain optimal standards in securing all election-related equipment with respect to both cyber and physical security. This is entirely the job of the local electoral boards and general registrars. And registrars tend to be the frontline people for educating voters on how to vote and to correct any misimpressions that they might have about the voting process. It is their job, the registrar's job, to train their staff and officers of elections. This slide refers to election officials, but we were talking about both the personnel within the office and also the officers of election, many of whom, of course, are the members. And finally, it is the job for general registrars and electoral boards to conduct risk limiting audits that are limited to their locality. So at this point, I will turn this over to Jane Newell to address the rest of the presentation. So thank you very much. Happy to take questions at the end.
Mute. Thank you, Lisa. I noticed in the participants list that we have a number of our study team on tonight. I want to thank you for being here and also thank you for all the hard work you put into this study. Voter confidence is extremely important. And a key to voter confidence is visible standards and repeated certification and up-to-date certification. And it's important to note that standards are not a one-time thing. They have to be constantly updated and broadened. The list you see here are some of the key positions that we should take to make sure that our standards are always being updated and are always being followed. There have been many changes in the last 2 to 5 years. Probably the most recent view on this is that these also apply to the security practices of the vendors of the voting equipment. So that is probably the newest of the views, and there's probably more work to be done on some of these. Would you like to go to the next slide? Now we get into the techie part of our study. The position for action was silent on cybersecurity. And in 2017, Homeland Security actually named election systems as a designated part of our the nation's critical infrastructure. So it was important to get that into position for action. Here we have some general statements about sufficient resources to keep, to assure that we are maintaining our election security, and to participate in national and multi-state associations so that we're keeping up to date and putting ourselves in a high standard or the highest standards for security, reliability, and functionality.
Okay. Yeah, that's awesome.
If somebody could catch that. If you want to look into this in more detail, I would refer you to the study on page 11, because there's a wonderful report diagram that sort of shows how all of this works, how all the systems work and interface with each other. Possibly the concern of security is the interface with 133 different localities, all of who acquire their systems and their networks from by different means. And that is probably the most difficult to assure. Would you like to move on to the next? Thank you. Most voters think of election equipment as being what they see in the precincts, though. And it's not, rather than the centralized systems. And there's another, in the precincts, you're going to see scanners, poll books, ballot marking devices, and in registrar's offices, the election management systems. So a lot of the certification and a lot of the standards and a lot of the ongoing monitoring and testing are around this equipment. There is a wonderful diagram in the study on page 15 of how the locality equipment interfaces with each other and with the centralized system. So again, as you're looking at the position, you might want to look at that diagram. Thank you. Ranked choice voting. Quick definition or a quick description. It's the difference between marking one little oval on your ballot for each race, and that's called plurality voting, or first past the post or winner take all, and ranking each candidate as first choice, second choice, third choice, etc. One of the concerns with plurality is that in elections that have multiple candidates, 3 or more candidates, suddenly you have candidates winning with a very small portion of the voter support. You have 6 candidates, for example, the winner could win with as little as 17% of the vote. When you think about that, that means 83% might hate that candidate. So that may not be the best way to elect, particularly in those smaller down ballot races where we have lots of people running. And once again, while we were doing the study and writing the report, the laws were changing. And in 2020, the General Assembly actually passed a bill enabling ranked choice voting for 2 options, for city councils and for county supervisor races. And that's the first bullet, and we're saying we support that. But there are also opportunities to expand beyond that. And we've identified some of those in this language as well. The pros and cons I won't go into tonight. We are trying to leave time for questionings, but they are listed in the report. And Lisa had already mentioned back on slide 18 that one of the relevant actions that is needed is that the purchase and use of election infrastructure needs to support alternate electoral systems, such as ranked choice voting. Next slide. Voter access. Again, things were changing while this was being studied and written. And Lisa's already mentioned a few areas where voter suppression or the combating of disinformation is needed. But at the end of the full position, we also have a section on voter access with this language that you see on this slide. It's the responsibility of really everyone to make sure this happens. It is a Commonwealth of Virginia role, it is a locality role, and it is ever more difficult, and with new technologies such as social media, it becomes even more difficult. So we've learned that in the last election, and we will no doubt see it more often as technology changes even further. In conclusion, we just wanted to wrap this up so that we leave half of our time for questions and answers. So this is really now your time. If you've put some in the chat, that's fine. Sydney's been monitoring. And if not, go ahead and add some to the chat. Sydney, do we have anything?
We do not have any questions yet. So if maybe, since we don't have a flood of questions in the chat, perhaps you can just do the raise your hand and people can do it that way. If there's kind of gives you a more immediate sense. If you go down to where it says reactions at the bottom of your screen and click on that, there's a little thing that says raise hand. If you do that, the little hand appears up in the corner, and then we will know who's asking the question. And then when you finish
I see
raising,
Denise has a question.
oh, sorry.
I
Where?
see Denise Harrington has a question.
Where? Oh, you mean you got a hand raised?
She's raised her hand in the participants list, which
okay.
is fine. That also
Oh,
works.
I see. Okay, that's fine.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, this was a very thorough and very knowledgeable presentation. And I think it's great, and congratulations and kudos to the team for presenting this. I just had a couple of questions, and you may have already, I know you were going quickly and talking through it, but you may have already mentioned this. The first question, when you talked about databases being updated, did you put any language, even though, once again, you did put language talking about disenfranchisements of groups or voter suppression, et cetera. It's very thorough, but I wonder, because we had some bills that were defeated that were sort of this idea of purging voters from the rolls. And I did not know if you said that specifically, even though it is very thorough, you clearly implied, no shenanigans, so to speak. And the other question is, you will once again very well define the role of the Commonwealth, Virginia. And I was wondering, and again, you mentioned perhaps attempts or what have you. As you all probably know about Florida and Arizona, the league is one of the key folks who's filed lawsuits against these voter suppression bills in other states. But as we have seen, some of the legislators have made these horrible laws that said that just the legislators, state legislators, can come in and make changes or do things. And I know you were clearly defining that role. Did you say something specifically that addressed that position, or is that included in that general idea of votes should be X, Y, and Z, when you were talking about defining those roles?
Okay, I'll take this one. I think that a lot has happened very recently, long since the reports were written and the proposed position narrative was drafted, that really heightened attention to some of these issues, but we were well aware of them. And I think that what's key to note is that we can't address sort of specific instances of efforts to change election laws to shift voting in one direction or another. What we have is a position, and the league's positions are always written in very general terms so that they are flexible and can be used to address not only situations and circumstances that have arisen right now or in the recent past, but things that we can't even imagine in the future. And I'm sort of happy to say that because our proposed position is somewhat general in terms of voter suppression, that the point is that league members can take that and use it for advocacy to address either the type of legislation that we've seen in Florida and Texas and Arizona and Georgia, and we can use it for who knows what might come up in the future. And since we don't have a crystal ball and we can't address that in any kind of detail, it's much better to have this much more flexible and general kind of position that you can basically seize upon, and you can run with that to advocate no matter what comes up in the future.
Okay, thank you. That's
And
good.
I'd also
That answers the question. Thank you.
I would also point you to the last page of the position narrative, because we actually reference the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and some of the things that we are missing in our guarantees. I think there's a language there that can be easily used to advocate against any attempt to take back any voter access ability.
Also,
That's excellent. And also, Senator McClellan's bill I'll just put back Section 5, I believe, of the Voting Rights Act in Virginia. But still, I just like the way you all, it's very good. I mean, very, very good and very, I understand you just didn't go by specified words, but you certainly covered, I think, every aspect of voter suppression and information and then recommendations in the future. I think legislators need to see this because you all need to teach them what to do.
I just wanted to add, although we don't use the word purge, at the top of page 4 of the position narrative, second bullet, we do say that legitimately registered voters are not removed from the list. So we have actually addressed that one particular feature in, so many words.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it should be very clear that Virginia has a fairly lengthy and meticulous process that it has to go through before removing anyone from the list. And it can't be done because there's a name in another state that looks like the same person. That is not done in Virginia. And I'm not going to detail all of the steps, but there is a postcard sent and the person has to have not voted for 2 federal election cycles, and there has to be sort of mail coming back and no response. So it takes several years before anyone can be removed from the list. And anyone who doesn't vote simply becomes a so-called inactive voter. And the only thing that person has to do in order to reactivate his or her voter registration is simply show up and vote. And that puts the person back in the active list, and it's really a big problem to get people off the list. Now they do get things like the change of address registry from the Postal Service to show that someone's moved to another state, and they get the death notices and that kind of thing. So that they do that, and they try to keep the list up to date, but they don't just purge voters. That's a big no-no.
There's a question in the chat here. Judith Brown's question. Would you like to say it, Judith?
Surely. Judith Brown from Southampton Roads. Great work. Thank you. Can you tell us how many leagues reviewed the parts and sent comments in? I'm asking this because we had a hard time doing this during election season. We cover 5 different cities and it was really hard, but I think we got our comments in.
Everybody who sent in comments did, and I'm the person who compiled the list. I haven't had a chance to go back, but I do believe 11 of the 14 leagues submitted comments.
Good.
That's what I counted.
Thanks.
I don't want to swear on the Bible, but I think that was it.
I think we had different numbers for part 1 and part 2, so it might have been 11 or 12 for each section, but we did get a good representative sample and wonderful feedback, and that's why you see revised on the front of these new reports, because we did incorporate a lot of that feedback.
And what we did was compile everything so that in section A, because there's the comments about part A1, we put part 1, and then we put in all the comments by the individual local leagues by league. So we had a little record of who said it and what was said. And then we had a whole list of all the comments about part A that could be compared and looked at together. So that's how we did it.
Well, and we also learned by the questions that were asked by local leagues, because if everybody's asking the same question, obviously we didn't explain it very well. So we went back in those cases and tried to explain it better in the report. So we hope that we've improved.
Yeah, we did actually revise the report and the position statement as a result of what was sent in.
All I would say is we have some really eagle-eyed league members.
Indeed.
Very pertinent observations. So thanks to all of you who contributed to that.
We are aware that it was very challenging to review both of these parts, and that especially part 2 that had a limited time, because there was just crunch time, from when things had to be sent to the board, approved, and then posted on the website. So we were very grateful to the people who took the time to consider these things so carefully. And Pam, there's a comment from you here about purge.
I just wanted to add the comment that I think in some of the feedback we got, a couple of the leagues had said that they thought the word purge was just a little aggressive and counterproductive. And I think that dovetails on Lisa's comment very well, in the sense that Virginia's process here is very orderly. It doesn't have the reputation that some of the other states have. So that was another deciding factor for not using the word purge. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else? I'm not seeing a question. There's lots of people are saying that, you know, they appreciated the work that we did. Actually, oh, here, Carolyn. Carolyn, you've got a comment. Carolyn Kaywood?
Oh, you want me to talk aloud? Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, please.
I was just thinking as you addressed this, that we take action based on election laws at all three branches of government. And I wondered to what extent that formed part of your thinking.
Well, of course, it's kind of inherent in developing a position, because positions are used to advocate mainly before the legislature. That's what the state league does, and this is the state league position. Now, locally, we advocate before whatever body operates within our particular locality, whether it's a county or a town. And, you know, Arlington has a kind of unique system. Others have boards of supervisors. And of course, you can also go in and talk directly with registrars and electoral board members. So there you've got two of the three branches of government. Now, we also advocate, in a sense, before the courts. For example, the league was the lead plaintiff in a lawsuit to allow a waiver of the witness signature requirement on absentee ballot envelopes during the COVID public health emergency. And that lawsuit was successful. So by having a position, we were able to advocate in court as well. So the position for action positions, if you will, are used before all three branches of government.
Well, I might also add that different parts of this study focused at different levels of government to some extent. Because election management, the responsibility for election management is left with the states in this country. And in Virginia, that's shared between states and localities. That was really our focus for those portions. What's interesting, though, our section on ranked choice voting is probably going to be more of a local advocacy, because the way the law is an enabling law, and it enables cities and counties to make that decision. So we may be using this at a local level, and you know, there are some policy setting things at the state level, but a lot of it will also be local. I think we look to the League of Women Voters US primarily for positions for federal levels, but what we have written does not preclude also advocating at the federal level for some portions of this. Many of these things are funded by a combination of local, state, and federal dollars.
Sue, you have your hand up?
Yeah, unmute yourself, please, Sue.
I'm getting there. Yeah, I'm sorry. I tried very hard to read everything carefully, and there was one sentence that just hit me, and I just wondered, I don't know where it is in our full position, but on the very first page where the league further supports measures, it goes, we believe in increased voter access, removal of barriers to voting, and then we insert such as a photo identification requirement at voting locations. And that's the only place we insert a such as, when there are lots of other barriers to voting. And I just wondered why that's there.
I think the simplest answer to that is that the resolution at convention in 2019 specifically requested or required the inclusion of a statement that the league opposes the photo ID requirement. So we honed in on that because that was an overt requirement in the resolution. So that was,
The such as just hit me. And I'm going, okay, there got to be other such as is in voter access, such as in prevention of voter suppression, and such as where somewhere in this giant position, as it will be revised, we are, I assume, saying straight out the league objects to photo ID at voting location. Somewhere we must say that.
He's
We do.
blocking that way out. I don't know if you can tell.
We do that. We also, a parallel construction, if you want to think of it that way, on page 7, which is where the voter access thing is. It says voter suppression access can include, but are not limited to, and then there's a listing of several things that can be done to limit voter access. It's not a such as, but it's a sort of an amplification of voter access, things that can hinder voter access. So I think that's a kind of parallel that you might have been looking for.
Well, I was looking for other parallels in the other pieces of that. Barriers is where the voter ID is included, but as I'm reading along, it just hit me, such as, okay, that's the only thing that has a such as. And that's just me.
Well, we do actually talk about having to have a specific position about photo ID because the laws could change and it could,
And I'm totally onto that.
Yeah.
And in your, on page 7, thank you for referring me to the proper page. You do on voter access, very, very clear. It's just the use of a such as in the very beginning on one issue.
Okay, would you rather have e.g.?
No, I would not have anything because you don't have anything on anything else.
Well, thank you. I guess
We believe in increased voter access, removal of barriers to voting, and the prevention of voter suppression. End of story. And then in the various pieces, we describe those.
Okay.
But maybe I'm the only one that I'm just going, oh, there's a such as for that, but there's no such as for any of the others.
Well, okay. I think we thought it was important because it was specifically mentioned in the resolution, as Lisa said.
I have some other things that I think are equally as important.
Okay. Okay. I'm not seeing any of the questions. We got any other hands up? Not yet.
any further questions, comments, hopes, dreams, fears?
Well, I actually have something I'd like to say that isn't particularly to do with the position, but now that we have included opposition to disinformation as a specific thing that we want to do, I think, and this is just a feeling that I have, and I would be saying this in a hallway conversation if we were in hallways. We're not. I really hope that as the Virginia League, this season coming up, that any disinformation we come across, that we can very loudly and publicly establish that there is a truth and a fact that we have checked. I'm thinking particularly of voting machines and the things to do with the security of the process itself, which we have now looked into very thoroughly. I'm hoping that we can make that a very important priority during this next year, because I think there's a lot of, well, we all know there's a lot of rumors going around that need to be scotched. And so that's something I would like us to see us do. But I just wanted to say that somewhere. So now I've said it.
That could be very challenging. I know even this year, I took on a Facebook post that said Friday was the last day to register for the primary voting, and that was in February. And clearly that was wrong.
Yeah.
And, you know, whether that was just a mistake or intentional, I don't know, but getting the facts out there is something that we all need to be involved in.
I just mean a concerted effort on our part. Judy, you had your hand up.
Yeah, yes, I was going to say that maybe Pam Burke could use this opportunity to promote her workshop on the workshop she's worked so hard on.
That's true.
On Sunday. I don't know, Pam, if you want to just say, come on.
Sure. Sydney, that is a very timely and excellent point. And I hope that you're able to make our bonus workshop on Sunday.
Oh, yeah.
Mark Schneider from MITRE Corporation is going to be there. And the specific thing that inspired me to invite him is exactly what you're talking about. And he had mentioned that it's those parts of the election process that the public does not see that is vulnerable to misinformation and disinformation, precisely because people don't know it. So yeah, we're working on that in a couple areas. So thank you for your comment.
Thank you. And I am signed up, and I hope you don't mind. My husband is going to tag along. He works for MITRE. So
that's great. Great.
So he's and also he's a member of the league, silent partner, more or less. Virginia, you have your hand up. I didn't ignore you. You just need to unmute, Virginia.
Yeah, I just agree with what you're saying so much. And when I read these comments in the letters in the paper about the voter system not being trustworthy, these letters just show how little the writer understands about what goes on. And I keep saying it would really be very hard to vote fraudulently. I would like to know how you do it.
I think you sign up your dog. Anybody else? I'm looking for hands here.
Well, while she's looking, I'm just going to comment that I hope we haven't scared anyone on cybersecurity. As we were going through our meetings with some of the local leagues, we realized we were sort of, by explaining it, we were perhaps making people a little anxious about it. But I would say that we found that Virginia is in a pretty good position as states go, and we felt fairly comfortable in its cybersecurity posture. Doesn't mean that there isn't work to be done, but we felt fairly comfortable. Our equipment is fairly new. Our main system, Verus, is in the process of being replaced. It is not very new, but they are in the process of selecting another vendor for a new system in the next few years. So we seem to be doing reasonably the right things in Virginia.
Yeah,
the proposals came in on Monday from several possible vendors. So
good.
They're moving right along on replacing Verus.
The other thing that we learned as we were going through all this is that the Department of Elections is really working very hard to keep on top of things. They issued a whole what would you call it, a memorandum of 25 pages of ways that they were recommending for all the local jurisdictions to become consistent in their practices and to do annual reports of what they were doing and to avoid fairly obvious mistakes. In my case, it was make sure that you don't put your election equipment underneath a water pipe, because if the water pipe leaks, your election equipment is going to have a problem. And we actually saw that happen at one point. So there are all kinds of things that they are alerting the local jurisdictions to, and that they're maintaining themselves. So there's an attitude in the Department of Elections that they have to keep up to date, and they have to be constantly reforming and maintaining the system. This is very reassuring to me that that's the background and that's the attitude that we're dealing with here.
I think I saw a hand up, Pat. Concrete. Take
right.
yourself off mute.
I just wanted to make an observation that I noticed today in the news that after the Republican caucus to decide who was going to be running in the November election, there's no record of who voted in that caucus. And therefore, all of those people who already voted in the Republican caucus can go to vote in the regular election. So it's like double dipping.
But you mean in the Democratic primary?
Yeah.
Yes.
Or there is a Republican primary as well for the down ballot races. But
not here.
If you're in a district that's contested, yeah. But you're right. But we've always had the ability to cross over and vote in the other. If both parties were having a primary, we could always cross over and vote. So
that's not what it was, what Pat was referring to.
Well,
they voted in the Republican primary. You can vote in one or the other, but since that was private, they can vote in the June primary.
Because the Republicans didn't have a primary, they had a convention.
Yeah,
and that's how that happened.
Not much we can do about that.
Yeah,
right.
Convention next time and require that they record who voted. Something like that. That's a good addition to add.
Except that as a convention, it doesn't count, I'm afraid.
I'm not sure that will happen in the future, though. I believe that there was a bill from Dan Helmer that was really pointing out that overseas voters and military voters cannot participate in conventions, and therefore they will have to move to the primary system in the future.
Oh, wow. Okay. But there's a question here from Robert Choplin. Robert, would you like to state your question, please? Robert Choplin?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm wondering if there are any estimates of the number of people who should be eligible voters who've never been registered to vote for whatever reason. I know that in this last election, a lot of things were done to make registration much easier. Now high school students get registered if they, or anyone gets registered if you drive a car. So there's all kinds of things that have taken place. Nonetheless, there are people that may not be registered who don't have a birth certificate. They don't, for a variety of reasons. So are there estimates of the number of people in Virginia that fall into that category?
I honestly don't know the answer to that.
That was not part of our study, but if anybody on this call can address that, please chime in.
I think, a number of leagues are making an effort to reach out to non-participatory, to persons who are less likely to participate in voting and less likely to respond. In our case, we gave out a lot of flyers to people in the food pantries during the last election. These are people that are not normally approached. They don't go to the library necessarily. They're working 2 shifts or whatever. But there were a lot of people using food pantries this year. So we had flyers that we handed out to them. And I myself spoke to 2 young men outside the homeless shelter who do not vote and were not going to register. And they were certainly eligible. So there's a lot of work to be done there.
Yeah, it's a very good question. There probably are statistics or estimates out there, but as Jane said, it wasn't within the scope of our study, and none of the 3 of us has that information at our fingertips.
Yeah, we also I don't know how you would do that. You know, but I'm sure there are people who could develop questionnaires and surveys and you know, get some estimate of that information. So maybe that's something. We do have informational studies in the league where you're not going through this kind of ponderous process of you know, resolutions and a 2-year length of study and all of that. Individuals can do a little study of their own and sort of hand it in, and if you, as long as you aren't, you know, asking for a vote on it or something, it's something that can add to the knowledge. And it may be that somebody in this group has a professional capacity that would enable him or her to do that.
So a sort of related question, but not exactly the same question, is how do you do gerrymandering where you can carve out, you know, almost on a street by street basis? We're taught from the time we're in grade school that our vote is secret, that no one knows how we actually voted. But somehow, if you can gerrymander, you must have a good idea as to what your best guess is as to how someone votes. I came from another state recently. I now live in Virginia, and I lived in an area where my vote basically never counted because I lived in the wrong political area. So my question is that how do you know how to gerrymander?
But they do know the votes by precinct. So they can see how many Democrats voted in a particular precinct, how many Republicans. That would be one set of statistics that they would use. So they can definitely carve in that area.
Yeah, Robert, Chris DeRosa, who was speaking, is kind of the league's leading authority on redistricting. So.
Thanks very much, Chris. I see, I didn't see which hand went up first, Pam or Virginia. Pam, let's have yours, and then Virginia.
Yes, for Robert, I wasn't sure if your question about non-voting was directed to Virginia specifically. At the national level there, and I can probably provide a link to it, is the Knight Foundation study, did probably one of the most comprehensive studies on the non-voting population. It's called the 100 Million Project, the untold story of American non-voters. I can refer that to you, but that's at the national level, not at Virginia, not at the individual state levels.
Okay, thanks.
Virginia?
Can I mention one more thing?
Yes.
Yeah, I know if you've ever done any phone banking, I know I've done quite a bit. Sometimes you talk to a voter and you talk about a certain candidate. And if someone indicates that they're strongly, like, I always vote Democratic, you mark that they are a strong Democrat. And that goes into a database. I think the VAN database, and that can be used again. They'll identify you as a Democrat or Republican or not known.
Cool, thanks, Chris. That's very helpful. Virginia.
I think I just don't know how to put my hand down.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I did it. Yeah. Okay.
All right.
You're good.
We have filled our hour.
Yes.
I'm happy to say.
Mhm. Do we have any further questions?
I just have one quick comment. The Knight Foundation study is in the chat. There's the link to it. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. And that's very helpful. I didn't even know that kind of information was available naturally. That's really great, Pam. Yeah, I'm sure we're all going to want to look at that. And Carolyn, it's the way you mow your lawn.
I'd love to know the details of that, but.
Me too.
It's late and it's Friday night.
Oh, that's a great note. If we are finishing, that's a great note to finish on. I'm going to go mow the lawn.
Yeah. If we were in the hotel, we'd all be coming down to the bar and have a little glass of wine together, or
Yes.
sitting in each other's rooms. But this was a nice time together and very organized presentations. Thank you. And a nice time to chat with one another too and learn.
Yeah.
So, Judy's prepared a really great program. She led the committee that organized the whole convention. So thank you, Judy. We're really happy.
Thank you all for agreeing to do this.
Yeah. Deb, you're still here. And how you're holding up, both of you, I don't know, but.
Well, you got Deb and Joan on here someplace too. Yeah. Yeah.
And
So,
thank you all for the
thank
work you've been doing and, you know, behind the scenes, because it takes an awful lot to organize something like this in a hotel or even on Zoom, just to get it all to hang together. So thank you. And thanks for making this caucus possible for us, because we hope that we've had a chance to explain any doubts that you may have.
Right. We thank you.
Okay, well,
We
thank
look
you,
forward to
everyone.
see. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Jen.
We look forward to
Bye.
seeing all of you in the sessions tomorrow and Sunday. So if we have no other questions, I think we can say good night.
Good
Good
night.
everyone. Good night. And thank you so much for coming. Thank you for joining us.
Good night. Good night.
Okay,
Thanks
good
for
night.
spending an hour on Friday
Good
night.
night.
Thank you very much.